Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making minimal tech house drums inspired by Chris Lake and Fisher's song, Somebody. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 1 hour using the 80-20 rule of tech house drums. What you're listening to right now is the track that we'll be working on, and what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, the focus will be on this drum group right here, and we're going to be going one by one, adding each layer as I actually created it, so you can kind of replicate this in your own drum workflow. All in all, this entire project, if we zoom out on this, took about 4 hours, maybe 4.5 hours to create over 3 or 4 days. Mixed, mastered, arranged, all that ready to go. So finishing songs faster is something that you would like help with. I've created a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song per week. Visit the link that's in the description or on screen right now to grab your copy of the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And with that said, let's jump into this. All right. So first, let's take a look and listen to the kick drum. And so if you take a look at the pattern first, what we have is a classic kind of 4 on the floor. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 4. However, there are also these additional little ghost notes. And this is something that I heard when listening back and forth to the actual track. So if you just take a look at it, this is the main kick that we have going on here. Every once in a while there's a little ghost note, and then every once in a while I played a ghost note using a different sample just to kind of make things a little bit more different and kind of sound interesting. If we take a look here at the Ableton project file, it's something that I want to show you. And right here, we actually have the Somebody track by Chris Lake and Fisher in my actual DAW. And I set things up so that when I press the S key, I can flick back and forth between my track and the reference track. So I'll show you kind of what that looks and sounds like. And so the idea here is by using your track against, building up your track against the reference track, you can select the right sounds. You can choose the pattern so that it's similar, and then you can also set the volumes right. And really, sound selection and the volumes is going to be that shortcut, that secret to getting you that 80-20 rule of tech house drums. So with that said, how do we do that in a little bit more detail? So that flicking back and forth is how I created the pattern and kind of heard those extra little ghost notes and kind of just emulated it as I was creating it. When we move into the sound design, what we have here is something a little interesting. And so what I've done is you can see here in this kick drum sound, if we zoom in, I actually found a spot in the actual song Somebody by Chris Lake and Fisher where the kick drum was more or less isolated. And then I dropped that into this little rack here, this Ableton Simpler device. And I've already mapped out a bunch of macros to make things a little bit easier. So first thing is I set the filter envelope to full. So here's how that sounds without that on. And then the idea is to bring that up. And then what you can do then is you can bring down the filter frequency, and it'll do it in a way where it's going to get rid of kind of like the hi-hats and any other the noises in the song without having that kind of unnatural kind of sound of just rolling off a bunch of the highs. Other than that, I brought up the velocity to volume to velocity just a little bit. It's normally at 35. I brought it up to 50. I feel like it just makes it sound a little bit more punchier, stronger, just a little bit louder, I suppose you could say. I brought in a little bit of saturation. So I have mapped an Ableton saturator here. So I can just one knob bring up some saturation. And then what I did was I just played a little bit with the attack, decay, sustain, and release. So I brought down the release a little bit, tried to kind of tighten up the sound a little bit. And then I do have also this high shelf here. So bringing it down by 4 decibels and cutting it off around 2.2 kilohertz. Again, using a high shelf here instead of a classic low pass filter, because it just sounds a little bit more natural. It's a nice way to get rid of some of that high end in a more natural way. Other than that, what we're doing is running that. I guess that's it. So that's the main thing. So I actually stole the kick drum from the tune, so that nails the sound selection. Got the pattern correct by moving back and forth between this and the reference track, and then got the volume correct by just adjusting back and forth, just like that. Other than that, that's really the kick drum. And next up is this open hi-hat. which is almost kind of like a closed hi-hat. This is definitely going for like the drums here, and I guess the sound in general, I feel is really going for that like minimal house style, like made popular by artists like Chris Stussy, which is a lot of the sounds are very tight, and don't have a lot of like decay. So like an open hi-hat isn't going to be all splashy. It's usually tightened up quite a bit. So what we have going on here, first we'll take a look at the pattern. It's just that kind of offbeat. And then also if you take a look, also play with the velocities quite a bit. So in the second half, it kind of dips down a little bit, and I feel like it creates a really interesting kind of groove. Kind of makes it feel like there's like a push and pull with the sound. So take a listen to that. Right near the end here, take a listen how it drops down. And so something I definitely heard while listening back and forth to the reference track. I don't know if I nailed it completely, but I thought it was really cool. Other than that, sound design just kind of like picked through a bunch of different samples until I found something that was similar, and then kind of flick back like this to kind of get the volumes correct, and that's really the main thing. Other than that, I'm using this little rack that I've made so I can switch between the sounds using this drum selector. And then also running that into this kind of channel strip that I usually have. So getting rid of a bunch of the lows, very classic move, running it into a transient shaper, just mapped a bunch of the common knobs so that it's just nice in like an Ableton format. It's very easy to grab it and go. So you can see pulled back some of the sustain a little bit, which is making it sound a little bit tighter. And then I have this one knob saturation, which is Ableton Saturator, bringing it up by about 4 decibels in saturation to kind of fill out the sound a little bit. And then that's really kind of a good look at the open hi-hat here. In addition to that, what we have here is in a little bit more of an arrangement thing, but you can see here we have just the one layer playing, and then throughout the song, I doubled it up with a different hi-hat sound, just to kind of give it that a little bit slightly more open hi-hat sound. So it just kind of adds to energy, a little bit more of an arrangement trick, but I did feel like I would show you that here. In addition to that, I should mention these channel strips, all these kind of little custom little racks that I built out, including this kick extractor rack over here, is all available to download as part of like a little Patreon kind of thing. It's in the membership. You get access to this project file, so you can steal all the project files, all the individual sounds, the racks that I'm making, all that kind of stuff. I'm dropping a new one every single week, so you'll get access to that every single week, as well as all the ones that I've done in the past. But after building out the open hi-hat sound, because I feel like the open hi-hat's kind of like a pretty big driver of the drum sound, so I try to nail that a little bit early on, starting with the kick and the open hi-hat. I feel like the next thing to add is the closed hi-hat. So let me pipe down a little bit and let you focus on this sound. And so when it comes to the open hi-hat, the first thing I'll usually do here is add in one sound that's kind of going over the exact same pattern as the open hi-hat. And this is for two reasons. One, it kind of reinforces the sound and kind of makes it sound a little bit more full and interesting. And then also it gives you a little bit of tricks in the arrangement phase, because you can then have that closed hi-hat playing during some softer parts and then bring in the open hi-hat at other points to kind of bring up the energy. Once I've done that, kind of found a good kind of a closed hi-hat sound that gels with the open hi-hat, I'll then start to kind of create a more interesting kind of groove or pattern. And so this one took me a little bit to nail. And what I did is I jumped back and forth between this and the reference track. You can hear there's quite a lot of like cool skippy sounds. And so usually what I'll do is I'll focus on the first bar here, just kind of jumping back and forth to pick different sounds. To make different sounds and kind of emulate that groove. And then I'll duplicate it over to the second bar and change things up a little bit, so it's just kind of sounding a little bit more different and kind of creates like a call and response kind of thing. Then the next thing after that is running into the channel strip as per usual, getting rid of a bunch of the lows, tightening things up a little bit by removing some of the sustain, making things a little bit more filled out by bringing in some Ableton saturation here. And then other than that, the main thing is trying to get the volume right by flicking back and forth. Pretty close. Then the next thing I'll usually want to bring in is the clap, so let's have a listen to that. So main thing here is it's going on the 2 and the 4, kind of classic snare or clap positioning. And then what I did is I found 2 different claps and kind of offset them a little bit. So it has, if you can look into the grid here, they're manually offsetted. One is a little bit earlier, one is a little later, and it kind of gives a little bit more of a natural hand clap kind of flam kind of sound. And so then what I have done here is very similar to how I do the open hi-hats. You can see here that usually I'll pick one sound to start as the main clap, and then I like to have different claps playing throughout, or different combinations of claps playing throughout the course of a bar or two, just to kind of make things a little bit more dynamic and interesting. The main thing here is listening for the clap, sound selection, and volume while flicking back and forth, and usually kind of trying to do it in time like this. So that you can kind of try to focus on getting the right sound selection, the right power, which is that's going to really come from the sound selection and the volume. In terms of any sound design, what we have is the classic channel strip, removing a bunch of the lows here, tightening things up by removing some sustain, a little bit more saturation, filling things out a little bit. And then I am using this one knob whip plugin here, kind of pushing things to the left and right, making things a little bit more stereo and leaving some space in the middle for other elements, which the next element would be the snare. So let's have a listen and look at that. So you can hear here, I think if you listen back and forth between this and the reference, I'm not sure if you can necessarily hear a snare. So let's have a listen to the reference. It's not necessarily obvious. I think it might be in there, but I do usually like to have snares and claps, so that way the snare can kind of fill out the sound a little bit more. In terms of the pattern, what I did is it's on the same kind of beats as the clap. And what I did is I have one sound playing for the first 3, and then for the last one I chose a different one. Again, same kind of idea that I've been mentioning here more and more, is changing things up every once in a while so that it just sounds a little bit interesting and dynamic, and so you don't have that kind of boring loop kind of sound. Main thing is picking different sounds, flicking them back and forth, and then also trying to make sure that it blends nicely with the claps that we've selected. So again, main thing, sound selection and volume. But with that said, a little look at the sound design here. Little bit of removing some of the low end, again, kind of gives space for the kick and the bass to take care of that area, and makes things a little bit less muddy. Then we're, again, pulling back some of the sustain, very, very big sound, part of this kind of minimal sound, making things sound really tight. So, pulled back a bunch of the sustain there, brought up a bit of the saturation here to kind of fill up the sound a little bit, and that's really look at that. So usually what I'll do is, after I have built out kind of the core sounds, the kick, the hi-hats, the claps, and the snares, using one-shots like this, I'll then usually bring in tops or drum breaks to kind of make things a little more interesting and add some kind of groove, something that's very, very hard to program yourself or record yourself. So I usually like to just grab drum breaks for this. So first, let's have a look at the first top loop that I've added. And so what I did is just looked up kind of drum breaks, something like that on Splice, and played around a little bit until I heard something that I thought sounded good. This is a look at the actual sample itself, or the loop itself. And what I did is I have the beat mode. I changed the warping algorithm here and pulled things down a little bit. And what this does is tightens up all the transients so that things sound a little bit less loose, tighten up, blends in a lot more with the rest of the drums. Then having a look at the sound design, removed a bunch of lows as usual, kind of keep things less muddy and make sure that there's room for the kick and the bass, taking care of that area. We have a little bit of one knob sidechain, so instead of having to use a compressor and mapping it to the kick, it's just using kind of the Ableton shaper to an LFO, like the quarter notes, which usually the quarter note is what the kick drum's playing anyways, so it makes it a lot easier to just do this using volume shaping, and then a little bit of saturation to fill out the sound a little bit. And then let's take a listen to the next top loop that I added. And so again, if we take a look at the loop here, I've tightened up quite a bit here by changing the warp mode here, and then dragging things down so that it's cutting off a bunch of the transients, keeping things super duper tight. Then other than that, loops playing as is, removing a bunch of the lows, a little bit of one knob sidechain so that it's kind of pumping, making room for the kick and the bass, and a little bit of one knob saturation to fill out the sound a little bit. One thing to also look at here is when using these two loops, in particular, at least in this project, I have one that's slightly panned to the left, and then one that's slightly panned to the right, kind of giving it a stereo sound and making it a little bit more interesting, making sure the middle isn't too cluttered up. Then the last thing that I want to show you here is this shaker loop. And so what I did here was found a kind of a shaker loop, and then I kind of cut things up quite a bit and moved things kind of in almost a very like closed hi-hat kind of position to emphasize some of those notes and to kind of give it that cool skippy moving, pushing and pulling kind of minimal kind of vibe. And this was just something I think I heard in the reference track, so if we flick back and forth, I think that you can hear quite a bit of that skippy shaker sound, and that's kind of what I was going for in this regard here. And that is a overlook of the drums, and what we'll do in the next video is we'll focus on the bass. Hello again, my friend. Hopefully you found that video useful. If you'd like to follow along yourself with the 5-step song finishing checklist, there will be a link in the description below where you can get access to that completely for free, and it's going to help you finish your songs a lot faster and better than ever before. If you found this video useful, like and subscribe and all that good stuff, but really the best thing I can do for you is hook you up with that free checklist, so make sure you check that one. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video, my friend. Have a good one.